Freethinkers, and I want to say thank you very much for coming out today. It's a beautiful day outside, and we're going to have a great program inside here for you today. Arkansas Society of Freethinkers is a nonprofit organization devoted to the separation of church and state, the promotion of a scientific and humanistic viewpoint, and improving the lives of non-believers. The restroom locations are out the door to your left. You need them. And now for our standard disclaimer. ASF is a diverse organization with members who represent a wide range of opinions. The speakers who present at our big meetings do not necessarily represent the view of ASF or its individual members. Because we are a 501c3 organization, ASF cannot directly support or endorse candidates for public office, but we can advocate for causes such as the separation of church and state, scientific literacy, societal progress, and truthful communication. If everyone could please leave if you are a member of the audience, leave your mask on for the duration of the presentation, and speakers tend to get winded if they speak up here for a long period of time with the mask on, so we'll have them off. Our free thought for the day is kind of a juxtaposition for what our main feature speaker is going to do today, because our main feature speaker is going to talk about ethics. And today's free thought of the day is the other side of ethics, the dark side. And the lesson of how not to do something is part of the lesson of how to do it. And this is maybe an analysis of how not to. Our free thought of the day for today comes from the book The Aryan Jesus by the historian Susanna Heschel, who's arguably one of, if not the leading authorities on the Deutsche Christian movement during the Nazi regime. And it deals with the dark side of ethical philosophy and what happens when you allow false premises to influence your ethics. And so today we're going to learn something about how racists use religion to justify their unethical behavior. Heschel wrote, "Race theorists saw the body as a carrier of the soul, of moral and spiritual potencies, making race theory a kind of theology. As Richard Dyer writes in his study of whiteness, quote, for all the emphasis on the body in Christianity, the point is that the spirit is in the body. What has made Christianity compelling and fascinating is precisely the mystery that it possesses. That somehow there is in the body something that is not of the body, which may be variously termed spirit, mind, soul, or God." Unquote. For racists, it is the moral and spiritual threat of lesser races, such as Jews, that racists worry about. The inferior bodies of those races are carriers of their corrupt spirits, not causes of the corruption. The tired argument that racism is about biology fails to recognize that racism emphasizes the dangers posed by the body to the spirit. Flesh is crucial to racist thinking because the body is not simply a symbol of the degenerate spirit. Rather, moral degeneracy is incarnate within the body, and the two cannot be separated. The fundamental relationship between body and soul characterizing modern racist discourse is a mirror of the body-soul dilemma at the heart of Christian metaphysics, and is precisely the stamp that Christianity has placed on Western philosophy. So there's the dark side, and I'm sure you're all waiting for Anne to show us a better way. The key function of the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers is helping us make new friends. And so if you could, as best you can, social distancing, take a look to your left and to your right and give a little wave and mention your name to the person next to you and let them know who you are if you don't already know them.
Dawn. Nice to meet you. Yes.
All right. Next up on our agenda is Misinformation of the Month, where we learn what sort of misinformation and bad influences are going around and influencing people's behavior on the internet and elsewhere, conspiracy theories, pseudoscience, etc. Vern Bradley will be presenting today's Misinformation of the Month, and if you could all give him a warm hand, he'll feel very welcome.
step here. Hello. When I was asked to do this, I immediately knew what I was going to do, and really had a lot of things I wanted, slides and film clips and things, and realized that with a day and a half to do this, that wasn't likely to happen. And I then remembered I had just blocked someone from my social media. And I didn't block him because he disagreed with me about something. I didn't block him because he was promoting something else. I blocked him because I said something that was absolutely and fundamentally true. And I think everybody knows it. And his answer, his reply to that was, well, that was a story we got. And what this dealt with was COVID in the beginning. And he said, I told him that pretty much the entire time we've gotten the same advice. And that's 90% true. In the beginning, they told us not to wear masks, but the reason they told us not to wear masks was because the folks that were making the mask did not have enough to provide to everybody and to the medical community. If you doubt that, look at how many hospitals had problems finding personal protective equipment. And when I said part of the problem was the administration in charge at the time started bidding for the PPE at the same time that the states were trying to bid for it and were outbidding them a lot. Well, his answer to that was, that's the story we got. And so I said, when you just do something that ridiculous, you're perilously close to getting blocked from me. And his answer to that was, do your worst. And that's the worst I could do, so I blocked. I started doing some research about history of vaccines. And one of the things I found out, I'm going to reference to a podcast and 2 YouTube videos. They are at this moment up in the main Arkansas Society of Freethinkers Facebook group. Not the page, but up the group. You'll find links to all 3 of these things that I'm going to reference. One of the things I found fascinating is people who have researched this believe that the ancestor to what we now refer to as COVID-19 is 294 million years old. They believe that it existed long before people did, but they believe it did exist at the time that we had bats and birds. And there are references, and so the idea that this is something new, it's really not. A lot of people say, what's new, what was old is new again. An inoculation. There is a mention in a 1549 medical text from China, a casual mention of inoculation. People that research this stuff believe that it's a casual mention because it was really some propaganda to make it sound like they've been doing this for a long time, when it was really fairly new. But in 1549, they were doing this in China, and they had 3 ways of inoculating you. They would have you sit close to a person with smallpox or with a disease that had scabs on it, scrape it, and use a bamboo pipe and blow it towards you. They would force you to breathe pus from that person, or they would make you lay in bed with the person that had the disease, and then the chi would transfer from them to you, and it would keep you from getting the disease. In 1754 in Suffolk, England, a man by the name of Sutton, who was a doctor, was anxiously awaiting his son to join his medical practice. His son had learned everything he needed to do to be a doctor, but he had not yet been inoculated for smallpox. He got inoculated for smallpox, and it nearly killed him. And the doctor, who had been inoculated previously, thought, there's got to be a better way. There has to be a better way than what we're doing. And in checking around, figured out that what was going on is inoculation was haphazard. They sometimes cut a little deeper than they needed to, sometimes put more pus from the smallpox victim into the healthy person, and decided that they just slightly went under the skin, shoved in just enough to get you the smallpox, a slight case of it, that was safer. Later on, a man named Edward Jenner, the story that he used to tell people was that he met this milkmaid who had perfect complexion in an era where smallpox was ravaging people's skin. She had perfect complexion, and decided that what had happened is she had contracted smallpox from the cattle that she had to milk. Turns out that's not true. What actually happened is he learned of farmers coming in to get inoculated from smallpox, and the inoculation never took. And they also never got smallpox. And that's when they made the connection between smallpox and cowpox. And so they learned if they could inoculate you, if they could give you a little small cases of cowpox, you wouldn't get smallpox either. If you want to see a very, very good display of how inoculation happened in the 1700s, look for a YouTube video called 1700s Immunization. And it's a movie, a clip out of a HBO television series called John Adams. And it shows you exactly what they were doing, where they were bringing live smallpox patients in with live smallpox and putting it under their skin. Moving forward, Maurice Hillman, in this podcast that I'm referencing, it's called The Long Shot. And this gentleman believes that we have actually been preparing for the COVID-19 pandemic for 250 years. That all this immunization has led up to this. We keep hearing people say it's new, it's new, it's new. The building blocks to teach them to put mRNA into a vaccine and put it into us, the building blocks for that were awarded the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine in 2012. Two researchers had a vaccine for MERS, which is another respiratory syndrome. They had this, they were ready to go, they could produce it, but nobody would pay for it because MERS wasn't killing anyone. It just wasn't that important. But these men, as soon as they could get the sequencing for the genome for COVID-19, they did. It's not new. None of this stuff is new. And one of the things I keep hearing from people who don't want to get the vaccine is it's new technology and I don't want to do it until it's tried. It's been working. We've been doing this type of thing for 250 years. We have known about RNA or mRNA since 2012. The gentleman then at that time had it. It was a Japanese man that had figured that out. The founder of Moderna is Derek Lesser, and he says a vaccine is only asking your immune system to do what it does all the time, which is to respond to pathogens and then be primed to work when you run into a stronger version of that pathogen. It's not putting foreign substances in you. One of my favorite memes recently is about how do you go and get the vaccine so you can get your card, so you can get your card, and then you take 3 habanero peppers and mix them with 8 ounces of water and perform an interval. And that removes all the toxins from the vaccine and also removes little tracking devices that President Obama has insisted they put in there. I'm hoping that there's some people out there actually acting on that. The be-all and end-all of what I'm talking about is people often just make things up, and it really, really bothers me. And this guy is blocked from me not because he came up with a different deal, but because, oh Well, that's just what they're telling us. There is a debate on YouTube, from 1969, 3 months before Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. A month after I turned 11. And they're just show of hands, who thinks it was important that we vaccinated children for smallpox? That we had a mandatory vaccine for smallpox? Well, that's most people. These two doctors were debating it. The debate was not, did it work? It was obvious it worked, even to these two people who had different opinions. The debate was, do we still need to do it in 1969? Because there was almost no smallpox in the country. But smallpox was still running ragged in South America especially. And the doctor against mandatory vaccinations wanted to just mandatorily vaccinate anyone who was traveling from here to a place where smallpox was active and then coming back. There were no provisions for monitoring people coming from there to here, but the doctor was in favor of it, because it worked. It was not debatable that it worked. It had almost eradicated smallpox here. The doctor who was against maintaining the mandatory vaccine used this. For every 1 million children we vaccinate against smallpox, we kill one. That was indisputable fact. Post-vaccine death that could not be blamed on anything else was 1 in a million for children that were vaccinated. Except that half of those children had post-vaccine deaths because they had eczema, or they had a sibling that had eczema. I had no idea that eczema was a contraindication for the smallpox vaccine. The live virus smallpox vaccine was contraindicated for anyone that had eczema or had a sibling with eczema. Something about that. And that was the whole argument. For almost a half hour, these guys went back and forth. Not once did anyone accuse the other one of not caring. Not once did anyone accuse the other one of just wanting to impose their will. And not once did anyone call the other one a liar. Because they hadn't agreed on a set of facts. It worked. Maybe we're doing too much of it. But we're going to talk about it. And you don't get that anywhere today. You just don't. And when people come to me and say, I know what you're saying, but that's just the story we've gotten. When there's something that's acknowledged as a fact that we had supply chain issues early on in the pandemic, and if you don't believe that, you did not go anywhere and try to buy toilet paper. You just didn't. And that is the misinformation movement.
Well done, Vern. I forgot to mention that all of the elements of our agenda, Misinformation of the Month, member story, feature speaker, they're all opportunities that you have to get up here and contribute to the meeting and be a part and join in yourself. If you have something that would work well as free thought of the day, as Misinformation of the Month, or if you have a compelling story to tell about your experience with faith, with leaving faith, with discrimination, with others, with conspiracy theories, whatever it is, we'd like to hear it. And so please sign up at the propaganda table in the back for the opportunity to share your story, or just talk to one of us. Next up, we have the member story, which will be presented by the same person who is presenting our feature presentation, and ORSI. Good. And a hand.
Recently, step stool that Vern got so excited about is up here is because I'm short. So the story I'm going to tell today is going to dovetail with what I talk about later on. When I was in college, I started college in 1980. And by the time I was done, Jerry Falwell was ruling the airwaves with his moral majority. The religious right had pretty much taken over from the time I started high school until I started college. And Ronald Reagan was in office, and it was all about who was more moral and who was more holy. And one of the worst curse words that Jerry Falwell uttered when he was excoriating the people who did not agree with him was that they were secular humanists. I had never encountered that phrase before, heard it from him. And I looked up to see what he was talking about. I used a dictionary because I had gone to high school and knew how to do that. I went to college and did it even more often. And I found out that secular simply meant outside of religion, and humanist meant somebody was acting as a human to make change for the common good. And I started scratching my head, wondering why this was such a curse word, why it was so bad. I couldn't find anything wrong with either secularism or humanism. And that kind of brought me to where I am today. Hi, everybody.
Thank you, Anne, for the member story. I guess I forgot to mention, Anne, you had the feature presentation in addition to the member story, right? Okay. That's our next item in the agenda. Here's the introduction for Anne ORSI. She is locally famous, former president of the Arkansas Society of Free Thinkers, local lawyer, illustrious career, and in both her profession and in activism. There is too much to say about Anne ORSI right now that I can't even get it all out. So I will let her give her own introduction. You're all mostly aware. I present to you Anne ORSI.
There you go. Hello, everyone. My name is Anne, and I'm a secular humanist. So I'm going to be doing a bit of a screen share that I hope is going to come up on that screen. And Karen is going to, or Jim in the back, Karen's looking at me like, who, me? is going to help make that happen. One of the things that we talk about with respect to humanism is its connection with science. Byrne explained during his presentation just a moment ago about how reason and logic and research and thinking logically about things, thinking rationally about things is so important for free thought. We often get the question, well, you're a free thinker, so anything goes. No, that's not exactly right. We have methods that we follow and that we respect in order to call ourselves free thinkers. Humanism is, however, connected with the winter solstice, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. In order to do that, I need to sort of explore what humanism is, how it works, and lead us there. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into a screen share. If I can do this on Zoom. And I'm going to ask you, are you a humanist? And whether you're a humanist or not depends on kind of what your outlook is on life. Humanism, this is the definition from the American Humanist Association. They say it's a progressive philosophy of life that, and progressive is a politically loaded term, so we may want to talk about that a little bit. that without theism, without any belief in a deity or any other supernatural beliefs, it tells us that we have a responsibility to lead a life that's ethical and that promotes the common good. We want our own fulfillment and we want what's good for other people. So essentially, we're guided by reason, we're inspired by compassion, and we're informed by experience, because the only way we can have compassion is if we actually look at what's happening, assess what's happening, and act accordingly. So how did the American Humanist Society end up with this definition? Humanism has really deep roots. There's the early Greek philosophers talked about it. Eastern thinkers talked about it before they did. And humanism grew during the Renaissance. Renaissance is a rebirth, right? It had a rebirth with the rebirth of ancient Greek and Roman thought. The idea that humans are the ones responsible for making the change in the world, for being the change they want to see in the world, for making it come about. And at the time, in the Renaissance, and even up until really the early or mid 20th century, humanism was not necessarily separate from some sort of religion or religious thought. There were secular humanists, there were deists, for example, but let's keep in mind that we didn't even have a Big Bang theory until the early 1970s. Nobody knew how the universe started. Nobody knew how we got here. And it wasn't until the 19th century when the notions of evolution became fairly mainstream with Darwin's publication of On the Origin of Species that it really became a widespread notion and a popular notion, meaning that it was spread throughout different populations. So in the late 19th century, after the scientific revolution, after, of course, the Enlightenment and Reformation, although that continued and probably still continues, if we're looking at it 200 years from now, we'll probably say, yeah, they were still in the middle of the Reformation. The concepts of humanism continued to develop. And there was a group of Unitarian ministers and students at the University of Chicago who had some philosophical discussions about what needed to happen, and that deism was probably on the out, and science was really kind of supplanting it, because that notion of the God of the gaps, the more we learn, the more we know scientifically, the smaller the space for God to have to act gets. So they formed a group of humanists, and they started talking to others who were like-minded at other universities. A humanist group then formed in New York City. Albert Einstein was one of its really early members. They were not just Unitarians, though. They were Quakers, they were Baptists, and we're not talking Southern Baptists like we have here. We're talking about normal Baptists, Mennonite Protestants. But these were people who really talked and thought deeply about how we got to where we are and where we're going from here and how we need to get there. In 1933, they came up with the Humanist Manifesto. Now, the Humanist Manifesto talked about religious humanism. They talked about humanism being a religion in and of itself. There was no God in this humanist religion, but it was phrased as a religion because it was thought that the ethical values and the ideas and ideals that it espoused would be more palatable to people and more understandable if they framed it as a religion. So they did. In the Humanist Manifesto, they said the earth was not created. It simply exists. We don't know why it exists or how it exists. This is where the answer, I don't know, becomes, it's a good answer. It's an acceptable answer. I don't know, but I'll try to find out is an even better answer. And that's what humans do, and that's what humanists do. I don't know, but I will try to find out. Essentially, nothing supernatural exists because the world is natural. There can't be anything beyond what actually is. And supernatural is outside of that, obviously. Mankind existed because mankind had evolved from earlier versions and iterations of creatures, and mankind was still evolving, is still evolving, as is every other creature, and as is every rock and tree and star and planet out there. One of the important tenets of the original Humanist Manifesto was that people are molded by the cultures that they live in, that they're born to, and that they visit. Our interactions with each other define who we are. And not only that, we only have the here and now to act, to make a difference. We can make plans to act in the future, but there's no afterlife and there's no supernatural entity that's going to intervene. There is no Deus ex machina for actual human life or for any life, squirrel life, deer life, tree life, unless we are the Deus ex machina that goes out with a chainsaw. The goal of humanism, according to the Humanist Manifesto of 1933, was a free and universal society that people voluntarily cooperated for good, the common good. And this is a shared life in a shared world, so we all had to work together. The common good was a thing that started with the Humanist Manifesto being explicitly expressed and continues to today. Now, this was 1933. So the world started changing pretty quickly after that. Over the next 40 years, science and technology exploded, partly because of World War II, and then because of the space race. I mean, we had a global scale of atrocities that included Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Then we had the Vietnam War and its ecological disasters from Agent Orange and, landmines everywhere from these two wars, the disasters created by those wars, and the technologies that were created because of those wars that were then applied to ordinary human life. But we also had unrestrained pollution during this period. The Industrial Revolution had kicked it off in the 1700s, and it just got bigger and bigger, and that snowball of pollution got faster and faster. And maybe some of you remember news stories of the Detroit River catching fire because of the pollution. Rachel Carson wrote a book about it called Silent Spring. It was published in 1962, the year I was born, where she explained that this was dire. It was urgent. Something needed to happen. Humans needed to stop what they were doing, evaluate what they were doing, and make some serious changes. At the same time, in the 40 years after the first Humanist Manifesto, the African colonialism started coming to an end. There were wars in Africa that are still going on to this day. But there was also a civil rights movement, both in America and in Europe, and for that matter, in Asia. Mao's, I'm drawing a blank, the Mao's Glorious Revolution, I think it was called, happened. And here we had the civil rights movement. We had the Civil Rights Acts that were supposed to address things like inequality and discrimination, racism, and terrible problems that we had. And we had liberation of women. We call it the women's lib, right? As though women were somehow a different species from real people. And in 1973, a second Humanist Manifesto was written. This one revised the original one in some pretty important ways because it took the concept of religion out of humanism. That was the first thing this second Humanist Manifesto did, was take the word religion out. It also said very bluntly that the aspirations toward this mythical afterlife that religion talked about with its promises of reward and punishment were harmful and had to be abandoned. Obviously, not everybody agreed with that. And it kind of annoyed Jerry Falwell, which is why he started talking about those secular humanists and how they were so terrible. The humanists believe that no theology or ideology was relevant to ethical behavior. And if you're out as a free thinker or an atheist or a humanist, I'm sure you've gotten the question, how can you possibly be moral if you don't have God as your compass to guide you? And I don't know, we answer that in various, if you're only ethical because you're afraid of hell, then that's not all you are is abused. Yeah, you're not compassionate. But reason and intelligence and knowledge had to guide human conduct. And it had to be tempered by compassion and humility. Because we have to feel for each other, but we also have to be sure that we don't place ourselves in some position above someone else, because we are pretty much all created equal. We just have different circumstances. And the more we learn, the smaller and smaller that space for God exists. And in the Second Humanist Manifesto, they actually express that. One of the things that the Humanist Manifesto, the second one, really addressed was human rights. And they addressed it in the form of talking about civil liberties, about human dignity, and the right that people had to dignity, the right that people had to engage in consensual sexual behavior, whatever it might be. If it was consensual, it wasn't hurting anybody else, why do we care? The separation of church and state was explicitly stated in the Second Humanist Manifesto, and that's another thing that probably upset Jerry Falwell and his crowd. Moral equality was another important tenet, and that meant allowing everyone access to things like healthcare and education, regardless of their class, regardless of their gender. The world community needed to renounce violence. It needed to reject nationalism, and borders needed to be open. The refugee crises that we see that are created during wars and during times of other domestic conflict or times of famine could all be alleviated if it weren't so problematic for people to cross a border or to go where they could make a living and take care of their families. The world needed to cooperate to address the depletion of natural resources. We all need them. And to stop pollution and waste. Now, the Second Manifesto received a lot of national attention. And when Jerry Falwell and his crew called it anti-God and anti-religious, there was a backlash against it. During the 1980s, it was condemned in the news almost every time you turn the news on. And one of the things that was really awesome and that I thought was really cool, I didn't find this out until much later, was that Isaac Asimov became president of the American Humanist Association in 1985. Now, I always considered Asimov one of the great gods of science fiction, so I'm not sure how you can make him a humanist, because he is a god after all. At any rate, there are some really cool people who've been presidents and honorary presidents of the American Humanist Association throughout all the years. The third Humanist Manifesto is the one that we're operating under now as humanists, or at the American Humanist Association is operating under. And I we up with them because I really like what they do. I'm a member of their organization, and they currently are representing me in a lawsuit against this guy who put this monument up on the state capitol grounds to the Ten Commandments. And I really appreciate them for that. I really wanted to be a plaintiff in that lawsuit and not a lawyer. And I know. The third Humanist Manifesto is basically called Humanism and Its Aspirations. And I may be able to pull it up here on the screen. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. And it looks like I can. Okay. But at any rate, It says knowledge of the world is derived by observation, experimentation, and rational analysis. That's the scientific method, right? Humans are an integral part of nature, and thus we are the result of unguided evolutionary change. We evolved to be where we are now, and we are still evolving. What we're going to look like 100,000 years from now is probably very different than we look like right now, if we still exist. This pandemic doesn't wipe us out. Ethical values are derived from individual participation in the service of humane ideals. And humanism and humanitarianism go hand in hand. We can't do good works that are humanitarian unless we behave as humanists and work for the common good. It's not humanitarian if we're not working for the common good or for the good of the people we're trying to help or the things we're trying to help, whether it's the environment or whether it's animals, if you're volunteering at a shelter or fostering dogs or cats or horses or whatever else. Humans are social by nature and by meaning in relationships. After 2 years of pandemic, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. We're all a little bit crazy from the isolation. And we all want a little bit more interaction with human beings and not just on the computer. But one of the most important things that the humanists, the third iteration of the Humanist Manifesto says, is that working to benefit society maximizes our individual happiness. Helping others makes us feel good. And, for that, it's not really altruistic. We get the dopamine rush from feeding a homeless family. We get a dopamine rush from rescuing a kitten that's lost in a gutter. We get the dopamine rush from cleaning something up and making it better than it was before. So humanists are concerned for the well-being of everyone. We're committed to diversity. We respect those who have differing yet humane views. We can agree to disagree. We work to uphold equal enjoyment of human rights and civil liberties. And we do that in an open and secular society and maintain that it's a civic duty to participate in the democratic process. If we don't choose who leads us, then we're not making that change. Voting is humanism. We have a planetary duty to protect nature's integrity, not to trash our communities, not to pollute our rivers and our streams, and not to cut down our forests and otherwise destroy what makes the world work, because we are all interconnected. So basically, the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers boils down the concept of humanism similar to the way the humanists do. I'm going to try to share my screen here. This is a panel of the new winter solstice display that the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers hopes to erect soon on the state capitol grounds. We've had some problems with fabrication of the actual structure that has delayed us, but we hope we're going to get it up soon. But we've dedicated one entire panel to humanism because it is so important and it's such a cornerstone of what we do as an organization and to the way we view the world. Is it not? Reshare? Okay.
Please don't share, it's just very just slides.
Is it? Okay, well, let me stop the share and then reshare. Let's see if we can do that. There we go. Right there. Okay, this is the panel. This is the panel. I'm sorry?
We just lost it.
Right. back?
No.
What about now?
Oh.
Well, that's-
There it is. There it is.
Okay, good.
That's all right.
Finally, okay. So this is how the Arkansas Society of Free Thinkers boils down humanism. It's also on our website. Now I'm going to, you know what? I wonder if I simply share from the website, if that's going to be able. Our website, when you navigate to it, there is a menu item at the top for the winter solstice display that has all of the panels that will be on the new one. It's no longer going to look like an outhouse.
It was a sturdy out.
It was.
It was a very sturdy, well-lit.
Well, yes.
Yes, it was indeed. But we are going to now have a 6-sided panel. And our panels, which you can see them on the website, you can navigate to the website to see all of them. Let's see if I can blow this one up. One of the things that I really like about this was the "you might be a humanist if," and that's obviously a call back to the Jeff Foxworthy comedy routine. But there are some things that we do as humanists that define us as humanists, but a lot of people do them. Doesn't matter if they're humanists or not. They could be religious humanists and do them. They don't have to be secular. The biggest one is treating people the way you want to be treated. That's really kind of a common tenet across all kinds of cultures and all kinds of civilizations and in every religion. But it's absolutely a humanist ideal to treat others the way you would want to be treated. If you want to leave the world a better place than you found it, that's humanist. Because you are taking action to make something better for somebody else. Not just for yourself, but for somebody else. If you believe that all people have worth and dignity, you're a humanist. And there'll be a lot of religious people who say, well, I believe everyone has worth and dignity. And then, of course, in the place where we live, we say, does that extend to LGBT people? And they say, oh, well, love the sinner, hate the sin. No, you're not doing the dignity part there. If you believe it's up to humans to solve humankind's problems, then you're probably a humanist. If you're waiting for divine intervention, we're not getting anywhere. If evidence and data are important to you, you're probably a humanist. As Brian said, if you're arguing from a different set of facts, you're going to go around in circles. If you can't agree on the basics, if you don't have something to agree on, then you're talking past each other. You're not talking to each other and you're not solving the problem. And that doesn't matter if it's in science, diplomacy, culture, whatever you want to call it, and whatever you're trying to do. For that matter, around the dining room table. If you can't agree on a set of facts, then you're not working on a problem. If you believe that it's up to you to give to your own life. This is a big one where we depart from religious people. because my life is supposed to have meaning. It was meant to be. We hear these things all the time. As humanists, we know it's up to us to give our lives meaning. The only way we do that is by doing something. The other thing that makes us humanist is that we tell right from wrong by considering compassionately how it's going to affect ourselves and others. And that is, there is no concrete set of right and wrong. And I believe that was in one of the earlier manifestos. I think it was in the second Humanist manifesto. The writers of that manifesto said ethics are situational. They're always situational. What's right in one situation is not right in the other, necessarily. We have to consider a totality of the circumstances, and we have to consider how it's going to affect the people involved. And we're going to have to consider how it's going to affect people who are not involved. So we have to look at ethics not as a black and white code that we live by, but with compassion. In the bottom of this panel, we listed a whole bunch of organizations that, I don't know if I can zoom in on this or not. I doubt it, but we'll see. If we can, no, that's just making it smaller. That's not making it bigger. All right. Real tiny. Okay, get out there. But at the bottom of the panel, there are a whole bunch of logos from different humanitarian organizations. Some are here in Arkansas. I've got Arkansas Food Bank listed, the BAN, which had its roots in religious action, but doesn't require religion for somebody to take advantage of their services, and they do good work. Potluck, which is another food security organization that works locally. But there are lots and lots of other organizations that do humanitarian work that are not religious. Everything from the ACLU to the National Organization of Women, the World Wildlife Fund, Doctors Without Borders. And I'm sure that just sitting here, we can toss out a whole bunch of names of organizations, Heifer Project here in Arkansas, that do a whole lot of good without tying it to religion or without basing it in religion. And that's what we wanted to do in our winter solstice display with respect to humanism, is talk about why humanism matters to free thinkers. And the reason that it's relevant to the winter solstice is because so much of religion comes from, as you might guess, the superstitions that surround the winter solstice. Because, oh my God, the days are getting shorter. We would like to grow our crops. We're going to be in the dark where all the scary boogeymen are. And how are we going to survive this if it gets darker and darker and darker and the sun goes away? And we're just going to, it's going to be the end of the world as we know it. So, religions sprang up in every culture. And possibly there are religions and cultures that we don't know about in species other than human that talk about the winter solstice as being the scariest time of year because it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and suddenly time seems to stop. It no longer gets shorter. For 3 days, it's pretty much consistent, and then the days start getting longer. Why does this happen? It's a mystery. Well, you know, if you don't know why, you're going to make up a story why. I know if I don't know an answer, I make one up. I don't know if anybody else does that. Anybody who knows me well knows if I don't have the answer, I'm making one up because I don't know what's stupid. But there is a reason for this. Scientists have figured it out. It's axial tilt. They'll figure it. But organizations, or not organizations, cultures all over the world have created religions around the solstice. Christianity is definitely, or Judaism is definitely not the only one. And it's not the only one that's documented in written history. And we can only assume that they existed prior to written history. While we were working on this panel for the reason for the season, we found a wonderful website called the Solstice Lady. She has collected myths from all over the world about the solstice. She has collected the traditions, the names of the gods, the stories that go along with them, the rituals that are observed, the monuments built to the solstice all over the world. It's really a cool website, and I recommend you go check it out. And it's, other than the American Humanist Association, it's the only outbound link that's on this monument, the Solstice Lady, because she is so cool. So science is the reason for the season, axial tilt. And science is how we understand the world. The scientific method is how we understand the world. We have a panel for science. You can see the little symbol for the winner for the scientific method there, a little ring with all the steps of it in the middle. And one of our board members, Jen Wisniewski, who is not here today, created the two graphics that talk about the history of the universe, here with the dinosaurs at the bottom and the burning stars at the top, created this wonderful timeline that shows the origin of the universe and the timeline that we know so far. We don't know it all, but we know some of it. So what we know is there. Then she created this other graphic that talks about the evolution of biological life. And this is, what trips up a whole lot of people because God didn't necessarily do it. But this is what the scientific method has allowed us to figure out about the past. We included a picture of the Mythbusters down at the bottom because there is no one who uses the scientific method in public better than these guys, more excitingly than these guys. But we all use the scientific method every day. We use the scientific method to figure out, obviously doctors use it to diagnose our illnesses. Our eye doctor uses it to figure out what prescription to give us in our glasses. But we also do it for everyday problems, like how do we know when to plant our garden? How do we know when the squash is ripe enough to pick? How do we know what variety of tomatoes to plant? Gardening is a huge use of the scientific method that we do. There are other things that we use the scientific method for, figuring out how far in advance we need to send our Christmas presents. We have to evaluate what the post office is doing, how fast it's running. Well, the last package I sent took 10 days to get across the country. Is this one going to take 15 or will it take 5 or can I count on 10 again? We're using the method, the scientific method to answer everyday questions. We use the scientific method when we're adjusting recipes in our kitchen. If I put a little bit of ginger in this, is it going to overpower the cookies? If I put more baking soda in, is it going to make the cookie flatter or fluffier? Things like that. So we do, a fun one that we might do, and that we did before the pandemic, escape rooms. If you're going to an escape room, you're going to use a scientific method to figure out how to get out of it. So we use it for fun. We use it every day to live. We just don't realize that's what we're doing. But we do. So science is a big part of humanism. If we don't have the science and if we don't employ the scientific method, then we're not acting rationally. We're not basing our actions on what information we know and have and what we expect to happen from previous actions. We're just kind of winging it. And, sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. In our panel, we also have or in our display, we also have a panel about what free thinkers are. Because, like humanist, free thinker is a word that not a lot of people always employ. But defining who the free thinkers are, what they believe, we think is a really helpful way to explain to people what free thinking is all about. You know how some kids are just born skeptics? They don't believe from a very early time. Maybe they don't believe in Santa Claus. No, Mom, how'd you do that? I know I didn't. I was, Mom, you've done something to do this. There's no way that guy could get that to me. I've looked up it. It's not possible. So, here's 5-year-old me using the scientific method to say, Santa's not coming down that chimney, But people who are skeptical, if you're skeptical, claims somebody else makes. If it sounds too outrageous, then you're skeptical. If it sounds too good to be true, you're skeptical. And if you tend to be skeptical, you're probably a free thinker. You want to look more into it and find out what's going on. If you question traditions, why do we have to do it this way? This really isn't, yeah, we do it this way every year, but why? Why do we have to? I don't want to. I want to do it a different way. Let's start a new tradition. So if you question tradition, if you question authority, then you're probably a free thinker. That doesn't mean that you're out there, engaging in a whole bunch of civil disobedience every single day. We can't all be thorough. But if we say, no, I don't think that's right, and I'm going to do something to change it, then you're a free thinker. Or something ought to be done to change it. You're just thinking, you're a humanist if you actually do something to change it. You're a free thinker, just think about changing it. But there are different ways and we put an FAQ up on our website for the most common questions. And those are the questions about how can you be moral and free thinking means anything goes, right? And things like that. So there is an FAQ that's on our website now that answers most of the questions about what it means to be a free thinker and why we're not as crazy as you'd like to think we are. Well, all right. Maybe I shouldn't put that part in. But how do you become a free thinker? You think. And you have to be exposed to ideas that are not just those comfortable ones that you are always exposed to. You've got to think outside the box. You've got to look outside of the box for other ideas. And the way you do that is reading. Well, the way you did that before YouTube was reading. Now you can go down any conspiracy rabbit hole on YouTube to find out different things. But again, if it's not backed up by a rational application of facts, then there's a bit of a problem. We have on our website, we have a whole list of books that are categorized in different ways. And let me see if I can get to that tab. Show it off. But we put a slideshow of some of our favorite books that are really kind of mind-bending, and that I just picked up a new one that's not on this list yet that I'm reading. It's making me think absolutely sideways about things that I thought I knew about world history and about the evolution of civilizations. And I think it's absolutely wonderful in that regard. Let's see if we can get this page to load. We've got a whole bunch of different books, slideshows in different categories of books that talk about things like ethics. There we go. Ethics, about the history of free thinkers. There's our buddy Thoreau. And Susan Jacoby's book on American free thinkers and American secularism is absolutely wonderful. Genetics and evolution is another big category that we have, because it does talk about how evolution is possible. And Inheritance was a great book on epigenetics that I thought was fascinating. Tangled Tree explains sideways gene transfers, how we get virus DNA in our DNA and how it matches up. So, there are just some really cool books in here. There are books about being better human beings. And one of the ways we learn to be better human beings is we learn about different cultures. If we can't travel, then we need to read about them. And we need to read about them from their point of view, not from our point of view, from their point of view, how it affected them, and understand their realities. Natural history is another big topic in this list of books, as is philosophy, and we can use everything from the Tao to Thomas Paine to the ancient Greeks to understand more about, there's Nietzsche, okay. More about what we do and how we do it. Primatology is a subject that I'm absolutely passionate about, and I'm not going to bore you about my fascination with bonobos just yet. I'll save that for another time. But religious and scientific skepticism, as well as spirituality, are important subjects. And we have other mind-expanding books on here. We even include some fiction because fiction makes us think and makes us think about things in different ways. I understand that Margaret Atwood spoke at FFRF's convention last weekend, and she's one of my favorites. Everybody knows her right now because of The Handmaid's Tale, but she wrote another trilogy of a dystopia that talks about technology going up and what happens. And she's just absolutely wonderful. But, you know, you don't want to get me started on books because I will be up here all day talking about books. We have another panel of the Solstice display that contains quotes. And this slideshow is going to go a little bit fast for everybody to read it. So I do want to invite you to go to the website and actually look at it. You can stop the slideshow to read something that is going by a little bit too fast. But these are things that we think are quotes about humanism, about free thinking, about rationality, about the scientific method. And they're from famous people, and some of them are not so famous people. They're in books, they're in fiction as well as nonfiction. And they're just things that people said in speeches or in, this one is one of my favorite. Well, I messed that one up, okay. Try to stop on the John Lewis quote and I failed. But anyway, we have about 100 quotes here, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But I want to thank everybody for your time today. I appreciate you listening to me going on about humanism and our winter solstice display. And if there are any questions, I will entertain them. Yes.
Here we have one.
Your comment about skepticism made me think of so many people that declare themselves skeptics because an idea is not founded on religion. So they are skeptical of humanistic ideas because there is no religious basis in a religious text or anything like that. So what kind of skepticism would you call that?
I would call it skepticism. They are skeptics. They're basing their skepticism on what I consider a false premise, but that's where they're coming from. And that's when we have to go back and we have to look at the premises and make sure that we're talking about the same facts. If you're talking with someone who is skeptical about non-religion, then it's time to take them back. And you know what comes up all the time is Pascal's wager. Oh, it's better to be safe than sorry. Well, as Richard Dawkins said, the big juju under the sea is really going to be pissed off that you were Brandy Elway.
When you were talking about doing the right thing, when we do good things, we feel rewarded, we feel better about ourselves. This reminded me of this sign years and years ago. It affected me so much, I still remember it. It was so nice. They had put the sign in one of the parks, and it read, "Don't let it be said, it's a shame. This place was beautiful before you came." And I love that. And of course, they're referring to the park thing, but we can apply that to the universe, to our environment. So
That's true.
that was beautiful.
I like that. And it makes me think of that song Paradise. They cut down the trees to build up a parking lot.
Right.
Okay. Thanks everybody so much for coming today.
appreciate it. Next up, we have some brief remarks by Ken Gould.
Thank Chris very much for giving me I showed up unannounced, asked for a few minutes, for a short time to speak, and considering that you've been here quite a while already, I'm just going to introduce myself, tell you what I want to talk about, and we'll do that in the January meeting, so it'll be a preview of coming attractions and also an opportunity to say, well, if he's coming back in January, I'm not going to be here. My name is Ken Gould. I'm a member of the Unitarian Church, a life member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, a retired law professor who is extremely proud that one of my students has achieved much. That student's name is ORSI. I've just come back about a week and a half ago from the Freedom from Religion Foundation convention in Boston, and it was the best convention I've attended in all the conventions I've attended in my career, both as a law professor and through other endeavors. And one of the reasons I went, and I'll just mention this briefly, is it's just there were about 600 people in attendance. It was just wonderful to sit there in a room with 600 people, knowing that all the other people in that room think the same way I do. Whereas in most other environments here in Little Rock or anywhere else in the country, if I stood up and said how I think about religion, I might be stoned. I want to talk about, we can just briefly preview what happened at the convention in an effort to perhaps interest you in going to next year's convention, which will be a little closer to San Antonio. This is, I think, the third convention I've attended. Also to try to assess the extent to which there might be interest in starting a Freedom from Religion Foundation chapter here in Little Rock. Incidentally, I went as the state representative from Arkansas to the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which was not really difficult to achieve, considering I was the only person there from Arkansas. And I went to the state representatives meeting and introduced myself as I asked a question of a panel by saying that I was the state representative from Arkansas, that I was appearing before them having won a bitterly contested and long, drawn-out battle to be the state representative. And I realized afterwards I should have said, that's a joke, folks, because people came up to me later and said, congratulations. So that's it for today. I hope to see you in January. My mask with Richards also has a mask from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which says, "In science I trust."
Thanks, Dan. I bet that was fun. And also congratulations on winning. Well, folks, this is our second in-person meetup since the pandemic began. And quite frankly, the pandemic has knocked us on our behinds. We have been sort of disrupted as an organization, and we're trying to get back into the swing of things. And it's all tentative. It's all, how things turn out. We're following science and following the recommendations and doing our best to prevent the spread. And we hope to also prioritize our mission, which is important. The things that we're trying to do are important. And if you're glad that free thinkers are organizing here in Arkansas, then now's the time. We really need your support. There are a number of ways that you can support us. Most of all, we'd love for you to get involved. We need event hosts, we need volunteers, we need helpers. We also need you to keep track of us in the programs there at the propaganda table in the back. We have instructions on how to sync the Arkansas Society of Free Thinkers calendar with the calendar that's on your phone, so that at a glance you can see what's going on, new things that have popped up, and that sort of thing. Meetup.com is the preferred source of information about events that are going on, and if anything has been canceled, it'll be canceled there. So you want to get acquainted with both of those sources of information. I've used the calendar sync option, and I can just, with the push of a button, turn the ASF calendar on where it overlays my calendar. And it's just that easy to see if I've got conflicts or if I'm available and that sort of thing. So I would encourage you to do the same, because we're going to be looking at a lot more activity going into 2022. We call it the New Year's resolution, but we'll see how it goes. We'll need your support in any case. We haven't had a pop-up at somebody's house in a couple of years. We haven't had the ability for our book club to meet. We haven't had much of an ability to throw a picnic or a party or a gathering at a park, or a lot of our athletic occasions and whatnot that we were doing. We haven't had a chance to get our families together. Events for kids and stuff like that is a sorely needed thing, especially here in Central Arkansas. We can take for granted that we can come here, but let's keep in mind that they don't necessarily have the ability to make connections with a rare set of people like is represented by ASF. We also need help from people with special skills like graphic design, website development, law, project management. Basically, any set of skills that you have are applicable and valuable that can help this organization accomplish its mission. So if you appreciate what's going on here, we definitely need your help. You can join or donate to the Arkansas Society of Free Thinkers at arfreethinkers.org. And with that, we may adjourn. Thank you all for coming.